Welcome to the show, James Ure.
Thanks, Jayson. Excited to be here.
Yeah, psyched to connect with you, James. Okay, dude, we're going to get into the family economy today and how to deal with allowances and empowering kids to be ready to become 18-year-olds and go out in the world and be successful, right? And this is a big conversation, so I'm psyched. We've talked before about this informally, but I was like, God, I gotta basically have the same conversation, but record it and share it with all the parents that listen to this podcast, because there's a lot of people kind of jammed up around how do we deal with money and our kids. Yeah, so thanks for being here. How, James, just as a kind of intro, I read your intro, but how would you describe yourself these days?
Well, I'm in a bit of a transition. I started an education company 15 years ago and ran that as an education entrepreneur. Loved that. Started out as a middle school and a high school and kind of took it online. I exited that a couple years ago, and so I've been on a sabbatical now for 2 years, and I'm just coming out of that. I really love that experience. I'm just coming out of that now and starting a company with a friend of mine around life coaching, personal life coaching, and family life coaching. So we're just sort of launching that right now, still getting that off the ground.
Amazing. And you describe your family dynamics. Married with how many kids again? 4 or something?
Yep, we're just coming up on our 20 year with my life partner. Her name's Ange, and we've got 4 kids. My oldest is 18. She's a freshman in college. And then I have 3 boys, and they all have birthdays. Most of us have birthdays in the month of February, so they're going to be 17, 15, and 11.
Wow. Yeah, cool. Yeah, we share that February birthday with my son. Awesome. And previously we talked a little bit about your background in education, which I think we were sort of bonding around just how education needs to change, and we need to teach people about like money and relationships and all that, which I love that conversation. So today we're going to zero in on the money part. And I'm doing this selfishly for me because my wife and I want to do this part of our lives better. And I'll just set it up. Backstory, you already know the backstory, but for the listener, so I took the view, I grew up with an allowance. My parents paid me an allowance and I just saved it all. I was kind of a miser saver guy. And then freshman year in college, I blew it all on pot and I just bought a bunch of weed and smoked it all. So I'm like, what did that teach me? Did that teach me anything? I don't know. So I've had an aversion to allowance. And so, until you and I talked and you were like, no, dude, like, here's why allowance could work. And so we'll get into that. But prior to that, my kids now are going to be 15 and 13, and we haven't done an allowance up till now. I've been taking the view that chores around the house are part of being in the family. That's just part of what we do here, is we do the dishes and laundry and we clean, we mow the lawn, and, actually we pay our son to mow the lawn in the summers, but outside of like that, we don't pay our kids for chores. We haven't. And then, what else would I say? You and I spoke and you were like, you kind of helped me see that allowance could be a good thing because I'm paying for their shit anyway, right? Their clothes and their activities and their school, and I'm paying for all kinds of things. Basically, I'm funding their life, right? And I think your view was, well, if you pay them allowance, then you start training them to be a part of funding their life, right? And that was very eye-opening. It was very simple, but I was like, oh, I didn't see that. Because the allowance program I grew up with, right, it was just here. But it wasn't like you're going to contribute to the household program here. So anyway, that's my backstory. Will you maybe start kind of high level why you like to describe maybe the family economy and sort of how it runs, and then we'll get into what I need to do to actually implement.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's an important conversation. especially for those who are business owners or in leadership roles, they're looking at their kids thinking, am I actually preparing these kids to succeed in the world and to be responsible adults? And so this is like, I think, a salient conversation for a lot of us right now who don't want to spoil our kids and want to empower our kids, but we aren't quite sure how to do that. And so for me, I have been in education for so long. So I've watched like thousands of teenagers go from first entering middle school, when they're 12 and 13 years old, all the way until they graduate and into college. And I've seen lots of success stories and I've seen lots of failures where these kids just get out of their parents' home and they just don't have what it takes. And then the kids feel like there's something wrong with them, and it creates this sort of destructive cycle where they really have a hard time figuring out how to be an adult. And parents are hard on themselves about that. And so I found early on, as I was tuning into this from the time that my kids were only 1 and 2 years old. So I was able to just sort of like watch that process. And at one point I backed up, and when my kids were like 6 and 7, my oldest, I began having this feeling like I'm manipulating my kids. I'm trying to get them to do certain things, and I'm emotionally pressuring them. I'm doing things that to try and get them to behave a certain way so I can feel a certain way about myself. And that feeling, that yucky feeling I had, is really what triggered for me the big breakthrough that I'll share with you. And it's a breakthrough that my family's been using now for 12 years. And we've shared it with a lot of other people, and it hopefully can be helpful to your listeners. So the big picture, here's the biggest way to think about this. If you think about your children and suppose you break their stages of development down into 2-year, steps. Mm-hmm. By the time from their 0 till they're 18, they've got basically 9 of those stages. Really, if you start with when they're 2, because there's nothing going on between 0 and 2 really as far as responsibility. And if you think about if the equation is how much of the responsibility for this human's life is on the parent versus how much is on the kid. Mm-hmm. When kids are 2, it's 98% on the parent and 2% on the kid, right? But by the time they're 18 or 19 or 20 or however old it is, when they're going to be leaving your home, you hope by that time it's more 97% on them and only 3% on you, where you can still sort of be a guide. Well, that means that there needs to be a pretty steep curve between the age of 2 and the age of 18. If you want them to be fully ready to launch, that's a steep curve. And at every stage of that curve, there's pain for the kid because they have to take on new responsibilities. And so what I realized is I don't want to be the bearer of that pain. I want to be a guide and a support through the pain. And that means I need a system that is bearing that responsibility and bearing that pain. And I want to create in that system incentives so that the kids don't just dread the next stage, but so that each stage they're looking at the next one thinking, ooh, there's privileges associated with that next stage. I want those privileges, so I'm willing to go through the pain. Yeah. And that's I know it's sort of metaphysical or theoretical hearing about that, but once we get down to it, it's very, very simple. But that's just the big picture backdrop. I didn't want to be the one making my kids be responsible. I wanted them to be choosing it, and I wanted to be their support. I don't like the feeling of manipulating my kids. Mm-hmm. And so if that's the case, you need a system. So I'll pause there and I'll come back to specifically how allowance plays into that. But before I do that, Jayson, is there anything you want to add or follow up on there?
Yeah. No, I just like it. The reminder, the percentages of the 2-year-old and the 18-year-old. And they should feel empowered in most areas of their life to go out and be successful in the world. Right. Mm-hmm. And we're just talking about money in this case, but obviously in our home, we're heavy on relationships and, being a good listener and all the things, being a good person, a good citizen, and et cetera. So I just want to acknowledge we're not going to get into all the other things that we, I'm sure are part of your system that are awesome. We're just going to zero in on finances. So I'm just stoked to get in there.
Okay, great. Well, early on, I was like, okay, how do we create incentives? And I grew up in a family like yours where I was fifth of 11 kids, and
Dude,
it was very much on us. We had lots of jobs. I never got an allowance once. I mean, my parents, from the time I was like 12, I bought my own clothes. I paid my way through college. I sort of like that was just sort of like the culture, the brew I grew up in.
okay.
And that was sort of like the mentality I brought to it too. As a parent originally was like, I want my kids to know that they're a citizen of a team. They're a part of a team. They're a member of a team, a citizen in a culture here. And there are just some obligations that go along with that. But I had a complete shift on that once I really thought it through and started experimenting. And what I discovered is money tends to be one of the greatest motivators. It's like a dog with treats. We have a dog who we paid, a lot to send her through this expensive training program. And along the way, one day I got a text from the trainer who was like, hey, good news. Your puppy is really treat motivated. And I was like, cool. Why is that good news, Nick? Because now we can use treats to motivate her to learn all of the proper behaviors.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, cool. And what I learned is that some dogs are not treat motivated. They're affection motivated or they're other motivated. It's a smaller percentage, but most dogs are treat motivated. And that's an advantage when you're a dog trainer. Well, most kids are money motivated, and that's an advantage. And so I just began thinking, okay, how do you attach that money? So basically the way it works is each stage the kids are in, they get an allowance, and that allowance grows as they grow into more mature phases. Also, along with that allowance, they begin paying for a percentage of all the shit that parents pay for their kids. Like, my kids are in wrestling and they're in mountain bike club and they're in golf and they're like doing all this stuff. All that stuff costs money. And as parents, we usually just like don't even think about it. It's like, oh, a kid needs new golf clubs. I better just pony up. A kid needs, going to wrestling camp. I better pay for that. Kid wants new clothes this school year. I better just pay for that. And I question all that. I think that if you're going to pay for everything up until they're 18 and then suddenly expect them to have a job and be paying for 90% of their lifestyle, that's fundamentally unfair to that kid. That is not setting them up for a smooth transition and launch. Yeah. By the time they're 18 or 19, what if there was a way by the time they're 18 or 19 that they're already used to paying for at least a significant part of all the things in their life? They're used to having the money flow through them and using their judgment to pay for it. And if they make a mistake, they bear the consequence of that earlier rather than later. So that's the core idea.
Yeah, so cool. And my friction is coming up already, which is why I got stalled out after we spoke last time. And the friction is, and I know there's an app, Greenlight, which you'll tell us about. But the starting to think about, and I have your sheet you gave me a while ago where, for example, and we'll walk through these ages, but like age 7 to 8, the maturity is like I can care for myself with the help and reminders. And so the income is a $3 allowance and a $4 cleaning. I don't know if that's part of allowance.
Yeah.
And then the budget is 50% goes in savings, 10% charity, 40% spending. And they don't contribute anything to whatever the contribution line is.
Yeah, that's like clothing and extracurriculars. And
okay, clothing. And that's what we're talking about here is like, look, we're going to slowly expect our kids to pay for things because we're giving them an allowance so that they can start doing that. And then they start thinking about saving and investing and, I want to make more money. So then they're motivated, like you're probably going to say. Mm-hmm. But the friction was thinking about, and I only have 2 kids, was thinking about the spreadsheet. How am I going to track all this? How are we going to keep track? And oh my God, breaking down the percentages and deciding what percentage for a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old is appropriate. So maybe you could walk us through how parents can begin to think about age appropriate percentages.
Mm-hmm.
And then how you originally, before the app, for example, how did you track this? And how would you suggest people do it if they don't want to use an app, for example?
Great question. Jayson, I would guess that you've got listeners to this podcast who are in sort of like all stages of life. You've probably got some newlyweds, some couples with young kids, and then some like us with teenagers, and maybe some with older adult children as well. I think that whatever stage you're in is going to have a big impact on implementing something like this. Because if you already have 15 years of a set pattern in the way that you run finances in your home, it's gonna be challenging. You're gonna have to.
So meaning there's gonna be some friction there with like when they're like, I don't want to blank, or why are we doing this, or
and even with you as the parent, like you got to change the way that you're thinking about it. Like to answer your question, I've never had a spreadsheet for this.
Mm-hmm.
There's two things going on here. One is you read through the column on budget, which says like how much goes to savings, how much goes to charity, how much goes to spending, and that whole part is optional. It does. You don't have to do that.
Okay.
I started that when my kids were young, and I did that. And this is kind of like for your listeners who have young kids. From the time my kids were like babies, any money they made, I immediately sent half of it to a savings account.
Yeah.
So. And then 40% goes to spending, and then 10% we sent to different charities. Our kids love this charity in Guatemala and another charity in Africa and stuff. But I'm so glad I did that. That was like such a good move, because my kids now, even as teenagers, they don't balk at like putting money in savings. It's like the set thing to do. They know that they automatically save. So I think if you're starting young, then that column, you can really like get your kids from an early age contributing half of everything they make to a savings account. And that's paid off for like my kids when my two oldest now have each had turned 16 and bought their first car, and they paid for half of it.
Wow.
And they paid out of their savings account. Right when they turned 16, they already had the money.
That's so cool. And let me pause you there just to give myself a teeny bit of credit here. So I didn't do the allowance thing, but we did, make them work outside of regular chores like mow the lawn. There was, okay, what can you do? What can you think of that you want to earn some money? My son he's more entrepreneurial. So he'll go ask the neighbors if he can shovel their walks in the winter, and $20 here and there adds up. So he actually has quite a savings account. And we said we had two jars, basically two mason jars, spend and save. And then when the save got big enough, we would go to the bank, and then put it, help him like put it in the account and like go through that process. So we did do that, which is, I want to pat myself on the back for that. But
you
kind of stopped there.
Well, you can think of your kid's experience in that process. Like, how's that got to feel for him?
Yeah, totally.
To know that he had that initiative and ambition, and he's like got a savings account, and he's like comparing himself to a sibling. Like, I'm kind of a badass. Like, look what I did. That's so fun for that kid. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, so
but
like
you're right.
whatever.
Your point was important though, which is, look, if you're a parent listening to this and you're like, oh shit, I should have started this younger, and there is going to I'm not even thinking this way. You're just saying there might be some resistance, and it's going to take time to implement.
Yeah, and the resistance is mostly going to be yours. It depends. If you've been both giving your kids allowance and paying for everything of theirs, you're going to get huge resistance from your kids because you've basically been coddling them and giving them everything they want. And they don't know what it feels like to be responsible. And my experience is that every new level of increased responsibility has an element of pain to it. And kids don't like that. So you can soften that with creating incentives for them so that they're excited to get the freedoms in exchange for that pain. But if you've been depriving your kids of that pain, then it's going to be World War I for a little while. It is. And that's not a problem. That's just an experience that you need to have in order to get the outcome that you want, which is a kid who, by the time they're 18, 19, 20, is actually ready to launch. They know what it feels like to have that pressure of responsibility on their shoulders.
And you'd rather have that in the home and while you're under your watch, so you can, coach them through it versus out in the real world where they get their ass kicked.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Would you rather have them, get to the end of the month and realize, oh my gosh, I don't have the money for my golf camp that I want to go to, or to buy the new hoodie that I want. Oh crap, that sucks. Now what? Or do you want them like not able to make their rent and now they're back home in your basement? Like those are
right.
There's a real correlation there.
Yeah.
But there's another. So we talked about the one group of families, which is if you've been paying them allowance, giving them allowance, and paying for other stuff. Yeah, it's going to be hard. And there's just some challenge you got to go through in order to like break that expectation and create a culture and a system now where they feel some responsibility. But if you're like in the spot where you are, where you've not really been giving them allowance, you've just been sort of like paying for the extra things that they need, it's a lot easier because your kid, especially, your son at least, is money motivated. So if he finds out that there's a path for him to get money every month by just doing his normal household responsibilities, he's just going to get more money. That's actually not that hard. It's actually really fun for him. And teenagers even like it when they know, oh, I'm going to be paying for part of my XYZ, part of my car, part of my, homework, my whatever the extracurriculars are, whatever their clothing is, those are the main two. They kind of like having that discretion and feeling like, oh, I'm actually like paying for part of this now. So for that group of people, it's actually not that hard.
Cool.
Because your kids are going to want that money. So you do this in agreement with them. You like set it up and show them like, hey, look, when you're 15, I want to start paying you X dollars a month, but then I want to have you pay X% of your clothing and extracurriculars. And it's really that easy. I used to have to use an envelope system where I was like paying it into their envelopes every week. I did that for years and years. But now there's an app that I can tell you more about that you mentioned, Greenlight, where we can talk more about that if you want.
Yeah, let's do the envelope one just to start, just so people, because I think the tangible feeling of like cash in an envelope is really important for people to get. And maybe we can start with my kids' ages, and then we can, hypothetical a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old or something. But if I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old here, walk me through how to do the envelope process and what ballpark percentages I should be kind of starting with here.
Okay, great. So just to create a visual, I literally bought a cash box. So I had like, the cash box you see at like yard sales or whatever. I bought a cash box. It was all funded. It was all stocked with 20s and 10s and 5s and 1s. And then in the big open slot, I had 4 different sets of envelopes, one for each kid. And that was because I was dividing it up between savings, charity, and spending. But what we'll do is we'll just put it all in one envelope. Parents who want to divide it up can, but don't overcomplicate it. So there's one envelope for each kid. And at the end of each week, I would look at what level each kid was on. And I would ask myself, did they do their cleaning? Because we separate it into allowance, which they just get every week, and then cleaning, which is a Saturday job. And did they do their cleaning that week? And so if they did, then I just put all their money in their envelope for that week and just do that week after week. And that's all it looks like. That's as simple as that. So
cool.
Does that make sense so far?
Yep. And allowance and cleaning. So some parents might merge those two together, that like they're not separate. It's just a part of your allowance is you're expected to clean, and cleaning can look different for every family. Some people might not have a cleaner come to the house once a month or once a week. And so it's up to the family to clean the house, and other families might have a cleaner, but dishes and clean your room and keep it neat and tidy might just be the expectation, right? Everybody's got their.
Yeah. So let's just refer to both of those as allowance.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So every week I would just pull money out of my cash box and put it in their allowance envelope. Mm-hmm. And then they had access to that. And then, so that's half of it. But then when it was time to go do school shopping and the kids had selected the clothes they wanted, it was, hey, what percentage of your clothes are you paying for based on your level? And the kids just know that right off. It's like, oh, I'm paying for 5% or 10% or 25%. And so for your kids, your kid who's 13, it would be, we just set it at 10% at that. really, I just want them to have the feeling of seeing what it's like to be paying for part of their stuff. I don't want it to be too painful. I want them to be actually making more money from me than they're dishing out at that age, so that so it just feels kind of abundant. They're good. But then by the time they're 15, it's 25%. So if you go spend, $400 on their school clothes, my son, he'll pay $100 of that because he pays 25%. So he'll go to his envelope, get his $100, pay me for that.
Mm-hmm.
And now
he pays you, and then what do you do with that? Do you put it back in the cash box? Or
I
you
just
keep
put it back in the cash box.
Okay. Yeah, it's just like recycling.
Yeah.
You're not keeping tabs too much on that part of the equation.
No.
Okay, cool. Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Then it just goes back in the cash box.
And so they want something on Amazon that's $10. Do you still do the 25%? Cool. You're paying, $2 of that or whatever.
No, usually the default for me is that if they want something, they pay for it. If it's something that ends up being like developmental, like my son, my 10-year-old really wanted a basketball hoop. And I was like, I'm not going to buy one of those shitty ones that just breaks down. It's going to be like $800. And so I told him, I'll pay half. And he had another thing going at school where he runs laps at lunchtime. And I told him I'd pay him $1 a lap. And this kid ran the equivalent of 2 marathons that year. He ran
motivated.
he ran over 400 laps that year, or 500 or something like that. So like I ponied up. I gave him $400 or $500. And I loved it because he was getting all this fitness and he was motivated. It was fun. And then he turned around and he paid for half of that basketball standard. So I poured the concrete. I built, we just had to pour a little bit of concrete and then put this nice standard up. I only paid for half of that. He paid for the other half, and now he has some ownership in it, and he plays out there. He's like, 10, almost 11 now.
But that's an example of you making a deal, right?
Yeah. So if it's developmental, I'll make a deal. If it's just like, I want this drone off Amazon, it's like, sweet, dude. When you have the money, buy it.
And why wouldn't, got it. So it's almost like, okay, you're making the distinction between developmental and what I would call, say, luxury items.
Yeah.
That they just want to mess around with and play with. Like my son wants a $400 drone. So that would be non-developmental. That's just a thing, a cool toy, basically he wants. So you would say, cool, you're paying for that whole thing. But if he was like literal needs that he has, like clothing, I think is a great example. Eventually a phone, right? Phone might be a good example of, that's kind of developmental, right? So you pay your kids, they help pay for the phone bill and the phones.
They pay for a percentage of the phone bill. Yeah.
Yeah.
The phones.
Awesome.
Yep.
Sweet. Okay. And how did I called them developmental and luxury, but what did you call them? Developmental and what?
Luxury works, just toys, fun, whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
And even in the case,
like, what about a concert or entertainment? Like, they want to go see a show when they're 17.
Here's like the underlying principle of the whole thing.
Okay.
What you want what the experience you want is your kid coming to you saying, I really want to go to this concert. It's $400. Would you be willing to pay part of that? Like, that's the position I want to be in. I want them to be coming to me and making the case that something is a good thing for them and that I should pay for part of it. And if I can just tell it's like kind of a frivolous thing that like I don't actually care about, I'll just be like, I like the way you're thinking. Thanks for trying to persuade me. I'm not going to do that, But if they make a good case to me, even like the drone, if it has a nice video on it, and he's like, I really want to like figure out how to get 4K video. I want to just start into video work, and I'm like doing this for a YouTube channel or something. Then I'd be like, all right, I'll pay half, sure. So I just want to be in the position of the understanding by default is they are responsible to make their life how they want it. Mm-hmm. They're responsible to save their money, to buy the things they want. And I'm an asset. I'm a guide. I'm someone who gets to help them when they come to me for that. What I don't like is the feeling of, Dad, I want this, get this for me.
Yeah, like entitled
Yeah. Now
We're
I
not
just
doing
have
that.
I have zero tolerance for that. My kids, they are not entitled.
They don't bring it. So
they don't
you've
ever do that.
trained that out of them. They're not entitled. And so they're going to go out in the world not expecting the world gives them things.
Yeah. And one thing I
huge.
love about that is it tends to, at least in some kids, it tends to like nurture that entrepreneurial side of them.
Sure.
So like all of my kids have entrepreneurial ventures going, which I didn't like. I've encouraged and sort of nurtured and helped them buy the tools or whatever that they need. But I think it just comes naturally. I think our kids want, they want to have the life they want.
Feel empowered. You just said it. You're responsible to make your life how you want it. I mean, that's punchline there is like, oh, wow.
Imagine a career that draws on your passion for personal growth and relationships, that harnesses your ability to support, challenge, and connect with others, that helps you develop as a person while you help others at the same time. What if you could earn a living while making an impact on thousands of people's lives and even on the future of society and how we treat each other? It'd be pretty cool, right? Well, that job does exist. It's the job of a relationship coach, and I believe that the relationship coaches in the world are going to play a crucial role in the future of our culture, not only in the US, but abroad. 1 in 2 marriages still ends in divorce. 3 out of 5 Americans are lonely. We've got a serious loneliness epidemic and a looming mental health crisis that's, I think, already here. Couples that do well live 10 years longer than couples that don't, okay? According to the Gottmans, 80% of couples are headed in the direction of divorce within their first 4 to 5 years of marriage. Yikes. Okay, relationship stress is chronic disease. It creates chronic disease, in my opinion, from what I've read and the research I understand. I think it really hurts people everywhere. And I think the only way to really address this you could say relationship crisis, really, because it looks like a mental health crisis. It looks like a loneliness crisis. But we have to ask why. What is the root of this? Well, possibly how we raise kids. Possibly it's how we treat each other in our intimate, closest relationships. And the bottom line here is that people need help. They need your help. And our relationship coaches are slowly growing their businesses and doing well and feeling fulfilled and like they have a meaningful purpose and career where they get to work for themselves. So if you want to come be a part of this amazing training, you can apply right now. We're taking applications. That's open currently, and go to relationshipschool.com/RCT if you want to apply and get an interview. We do offer a portion of scholarships to people that enroll if money is an issue, and it's a big investment. But if you think of the return on the investment, what you get out of this training, you are going to transform as a person, as an individual, and you're going to become a better partner, better parent, etc. And you're going to learn how to effectively help people with their relationship challenges, thus leading to less loneliness, perhaps, and less mental health challenges for people out there. Okay. So come apply for our amazing training, relationshipschool.com/RCT. If you live in the United States and you want to receive text messages from me about my personal life or little daily reminders, you can do that now. It's so cool. And you just need to text the number 720-704-4852, or you can go to my.community.com/Jayson Gaddis. And that way you can sign up for text. And if you just text me podcast, I know you came from the podcast, and I will be sending you text messages. You can always stop at any time just by typing in STOP. All right. I look forward to connecting with you on your phone, folks. Okay, let me come back to exercise. That, because you said your kid running laps. We have a hard time. Our daughter is not a mover. But when you said that, I thought of her immediately when you said your 8-year-old. I was like, oh, shit, if she has motivation by money, which she does, but she's like, what can I do for extra money? And she's always like kind of clueless. And we're like, I giving her all kinds of ideas, and she doesn't want to do any of them. Right. But I could see this exercise or like a base level expectation in the house of like, you got to move your body, right?
And so do you reward that? Have you rewarded that for every kid? Is that just part of, oh, actually my kids just naturally exercise, so that's not part of our money program?
Well, that's the magic about money. It sinks. I mean, in a lot of ways in the Western world, it sucks how much money controls everything. Like, it is just in everything and all of our mindsets. And I'm not necessarily a fan of that. At the same time, I want to leverage that for good in my own family. And so money can be used. It's such a convertible medium. It's like, it's so flexible. It can be used for everything. And so, yeah, like anything developmental, if I can help my kids acquire the developmental skills, and at first I need to do that by paying them, I would consider that. I'm not above that. I'll try that out, my son running laps. So I think it just depends. For each of my kids, it's been different, getting them to do the physical things. My 16-year-old, almost 17, I can't stop him. He's snowboarding and he's wrestling and he's mountain biking. I can't stop him from doing physical things. The others, it's like kind of varied. But as another example, my 14-year-old is thinking about wrestling. And in my home, money and screen time, those are the two things that I find are the most effective at training the kids.
Yeah.
And so he's thinking about wrestling. Wrestling would be so good for this kid. I want him to do it so bad. He doesn't know how bad I want him to do it. Of course, I hold
Trying
that
to keep
close.
that under wraps. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So there's none of that. But I did let it drop the other day. I was like, I think, if you were doing wrestling a couple times a week, I could definitely back off on some of the screen time restraints. You're almost 15. And he perked up, and like, that would be such a good exchange if he gets, another hour of screen time a week, but he's in a wrestling room 3 hours a week. Oh yeah, dude, I would do that exchange all day long. So and I would do the same thing with money. I'm just using screen time as another example. Those are like the two things that we use the most, are screen time and money, to just sort of like help the kid, incentivize the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see that. Our daughter, that would motivate the hell out of her too. Screen time.
In both cases, you have to create an economy in which it's not a given that they get those things.
Yeah.
And then it works.
Yeah, we already have heavy restrictions on screen time at our house, so that could work, because it's like we're already tight. The screws are already super tight, and then you're talking about loosening them slightly if they do things like exercise or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and another thing I love about this is it goes back to that experience I had of not wanting to manipulate my kids. I'm not trying to trick. I'm not trying to manipulate them. What I want to do is create a system where they're incentivized to align with me in taking on new privileges and getting new responsibilities and getting new privileges.
Yeah.
I want to align us on that.
Yeah.
And so the way you've already got it tightened down with screen time, it's going to be easy to get your kids on board with this. You're going to say, hey, look, I want to find ways to give you more screen time and more money. How does that sound?
Right.
Sounds pretty good. What do I have to do?
Right.
All right, well, let's just think about what's the next phase of, maturity for you, and what kinds of responsibilities you need to be preparing for in the adult world for the next phase. Yeah. And you just sort of align yourselves that way.
I like how you're framing this, because I can hear some of the listeners who might be giving us some yeah buts right now. One of the yeah buts I'm hearing is like, you already spoke to it, but it's like, yeah, but you're just bribing them. And you're reframing bribing. What do you say to parents who continue to like, I'm not going to do this because I'm not going to, quote, manipulate or bribe my kids to do things, but parents are doing this all day long anyway. Like, I see parents using, like, I'll give you another cookie if you behave, if you stop screaming, here, you can have my phone. Which so many parents, it's like low hanging fruit to do it that way, because they're not doing it inside of a bigger context of empowering a kid.
Yeah.
So can you nuance this a little bit? Like, how do we know the difference between we're just bribing our kid versus empowering our kid?
I think it's a great question. And I think that manipulation means getting someone else to do what you want them to do for your sake. And I think coordination means aligning interests so that you both get what you want.
Nice.
And this is it's just coordinating. It's just identify, if you think like 30-second tangent, I spent 10 years studying the US Constitution because I was fascinated by the simple question, how do you create one system that works for hundreds of millions of people over hundreds of years and creates more freedom and abundance than the world has ever known? How do you do that through a system? Like, how did they do that? And, you know, in the end, after all of that study, it took me to law school. I'm an attorney. I'm certified in the state. I studied constitutional law as my emphasis. And in the end, it all became very simple to me again. And the answer was so simple. It was, you identify who has which powers, you enumerate those powers, and then you incentivize everybody to work together with incentives and checks and balances. And it's just so simple. And when you get that right, you create a virtuous cycle that just sort of keeps, that harnesses human nature in just all the right ways. And yeah, is it a bribe to have political rights? Not really. All you're doing is identifying what people want and aligning those incentives. And that's how I think about the family too. Like, what motivates your kids? There's nothing right or wrong about being motivated by screen time. Sometimes we think there's something wrong with our kids, or they're addicted, or this. Like, they're just screen motivated, and there are addictions in there if it goes, you know, unfettered. But it's also a very strong motivation. Use it. If they're money motivated, use it. That's not manipulating. Is probably what you're doing if you're not doing this. Manipulating is, I'm embarrassed by how you're behaving. I'm embarrassed that you're not taking responsibility for your life. I see that as a reflection on me. I'm going to use guilt and shame unconsciously to make you do what I want you to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we both get to feel shitty about ourselves.
Yeah.
So like, that's manipulation. I think this other is when you call it out and you're stating it and like, hey, I want to use this. Is this motivating? That's different than manipulation. That's like,
dude, nailed it. That's really helpful. It's hard to argue against too, because you're speaking to, again, I'm aligning with you to help you get what you want. And I'm also, you know, I want to get what I want too, but we can both get what we want here with this kind of system you're talking about. Amazing. All right. With the time left, there's a few, I'm psyched. I'm in. Okay. I'm gonna commit to this out loud right now with you, that I'm doing this. And I'm going to start with the envelopes, because I think that will be a good practice. And of course, my wife and I will talk about this, and we'll have her listen to this, but we're already very aligned here, so it shouldn't be an issue. Anyway, the part I want to talk about now that I feel like I have a grasp, and you've helped me with my friction already, is the fourth column, or whatever the other column of like, hey, the percentages, like we talked about, some for savings, some for charity. So walk us into the next step of how do they, first of all, let me back up one step. Do they need to keep track? Like, let's say my son's like, yeah, I want these new jeans and they're $100. Cool. You're paying 25%. Does he need to track any of this? Or is it just like cash in, cash out? That's how we do it. We don't really need to keep a spreadsheet and track any of this. Is that?
Yeah, we just do cash in, cash out.
Okay.
I just like it to be as simple and easy as possible.
All right. So, but meanwhile, he's getting an allowance, and he only spent $25 on his jeans, but the allowance, whatever I got to ask you about what we should be paying him allowance wise for his age. What's that number about that you would recommend?
Is he your 15-year-old?
Yeah, he's turning 15 in a week.
Yeah. So like around $35 a week is what we pay.
Okay. So we'll consider that 35.
Which sounds, I don't know, for some parents that might sound like a little, for others it might sound like a lot. I would just say pause and think about how much are you spending on that kid's clothes and extracurriculars right now, and how much are you likely to spend on their car?
Yeah, and their phone and all the things. And we could add up. We could actually do an expense thing in our personal finances and look at how much we actually spend. Right. So that would be another way to try to determine that number.
That's a really great way to think about it. If you added up everything that you already currently spend for this kid and divide it by 25%, and then whatever that number is, that's how much you're also paying him in, or I guess you'd have to divide it by 25% again, because he'd be responsible for ultimately paying 25% of that. So then if you just say, okay, if that's his responsibility, plus he needs to have a little spending money, how much should I pay him each week, so that it's kind of equalizing, and that way it's not much more out of pocket, if any.
Yeah. Okay. So if we're paying him $35 a week, times 4, how much is that a month? About
It's like $150 a month about.
okay. So he just paid $25 for his jeans, but he's got this, let's say he hasn't paid anything, but which won't be the case, but let's say he has an extra $125 sitting around. And now we can empower him to say, cool, you can put half of that or half of this $35 into a savings account, right? And then you can put 10% of the savings part into any charity you want. Is that how you do it, or how do you do that?
So what we usually do is there's like a default agreement with my kids where a certain amount just automatically goes to savings. And now through the Greenlight app, which I'll tell you about at the end, it's all automated. So when I pay them $70, depending on what, if I pay my 15-year-old $35, 30% of that, but roughly $11 automatically goes to savings, into a savings account. And then every so often we look at a savings account and then say, do you want to put any of that into long-term investments that they can buy stocks or whatever? And then whatever is left, that's in his spending money. And he can just spend that on short-term stuff. But the savings, we only let them pull out of savings for things like cars and college tuition and stuff like that.
Okay. Big purchases.
Expenses.
Yeah. And so big expenses as well as investments. So you can pull from your savings to buy some stocks, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then
one other quick thing on savings is every step of the way, I'm trying to just make this a no-brainer for them. So initially what I used to do is say, anything you put into savings, I'll match it. And so they were always saving almost all their money, and they loved it because they felt like they were milking me. And now with Greenlight, what I do is I just have like, it's like I give them like a 30% interest rate on it for the year, which they understand how amazing that is, and they're not going to get that anywhere else. But I do that so that they're continue to be motivated to send that money to savings so that it keeps compounding. So cool. The key there is just make it put it in their best interest, because ultimately it's in your best interest.
Yeah. Yeah. You're teaching them that they value saving rather than so many Americans are out there in debt because they value spending over savings, right?
Yeah.
What about charity? So where does the percentage of charity come in?
So there's just it's just 10%, and we let our kids choose, but they all kind of like choose that. And, I grew up in a religious framework where 10% was the thing. We've shifted now, but we kind of hung on to that, and that 10% now goes to charities of their choice. We like, Kiva, and there's another one called Cultiva, and, there's Lotus Humanitarian. There's several of our favorite charities that our kids donate to. And so that 10% builds up for a while until I say, hey guys, you got $100 in your charity account. Where do you want it to go? And then I just help them like digitally send it wherever they want it to go.
All right. And if we go back to the envelope example, now I would have 3 envelopes. I'd have savings, charity, and spend. Yeah. But in the week where I just pay them, let's say I pay them, like my son, $35. He's got, it's in a way I'm hearing there's one, I just need to visually see this. There's one envelope that's for $35, but is it like there's 3 other sub envelopes?
Yes, exactly. That's
okay. And you're doing that. You're not having them do that?
Yeah, I do that. I get out the cash box. Well, for years I got out the cash box. Yeah. Now Greenlight does all that for me, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a weekly reminder on my thing. I would get out the cash box and I would literally just make all the payments. It took 5 minutes a week.
Yeah. But you were also either making regular trips to the bank, or you had enough in your cash box to just kind of keep cycling through.
It often cycled through, like cashing when they gave me money back for the jeans. Like it was surprising how many of the same exact bills would end up back in my cash box over and over. So it was like once every 6 months, I would have to take money out of the bank.
Okay. Cool. That's wild. All right. Amazing. And then pre-Greenlight, which we'll talk about in a minute, is how were you setting up it's investments? Like, so they have savings, and were you just opening them a Schwab account or something and saying, all right, now we're going to go through this process of
Pre-Greenlight, I didn't do investments. It was just sitting in their savings account, and their only motivation was I would double it when they put it in there. But then the restriction was, okay, now you can't take it out. Since I just doubled it, now you can't take it out except for big expenses like cars and college.
Yeah, because my son's already like, I want to buy stocks. I want to teach me about the stock market. And
so Greenlight makes that really easy. But you can. There are lots of different apps for kids now where they can do investment.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, maybe now's a good time to talk about Greenlight. And this is not a plug for Greenlight, guys. It just seems like an app that tries to make this easier for parents. So will you explain Greenlight?
Yeah, Greenlight is one of those apps that when I discovered it, I was like, holy shit, this thing is like doing everything I want it to do exactly. It was like, it needed no customization. It was like perfect for this system, because what you do is you connect Greenlight, you download the app, you connect it to your bank account, and you fund it. And then with that money that you funded it, you add an account for each of your kids, and they mail you a debit card for each of your kids. And now your kids have a way of spending that money as well. And then there's automations. So in Greenlight, I've got it set up so that, I fund it like every 6 months, pull a couple grand over, whatever. And then each week, I've got it set up so it automatically sends the appropriate amount to each of their accounts. And then once it gets to their account, it automatically divides it between savings, charity, and spending for me by the percentages that I tell it to. And then my kids they can download the app too, and they can see how much they have, and then they have their own debit card. So now when they want to buy something, they don't even come to me for cash anymore. I come to the cash box for cash. They just have their card, and they can always see on their app how much they have in their spending account, how much they have in savings. And once their savings hits a certain amount, they start realizing, I want to buy some more stocks. And you can do that from within the account. In fact, in Greenlight, it does this you take a little profile on your risk tolerance, and then it recommends little stocks to you. And so now my kids are buying their own stocks, and they're always comparing with each other. Hey, my stocks went up $100. Hey, my stocks, and there's a competition to see who can get the most in savings, who can get the most investments. And I didn't do any of that. It's just baked into the app so easily.
That's crazy. Now, were you previously banking, let's say at Chase or Wells Fargo or something, and now most of your kids are banking through Greenlight?
Yeah.
So Greenlight doesn't hook up to Chase or Wells Fargo. It's its own bank, basically.
It is. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And my oldest daughter still has a Wells Fargo account just because I think it might help with credit, building her credit and stuff. I don't know. I don't know how Greenlight does with credit or whatever, but but it's so convenient. Like my kids don't have accounts anywhere else now, and I love it. It's so simple.
Yeah. Well, and I think we both know that anyone who invests money and saves money, if you automate stuff, that's when we're going to be most successful, right? It's when we get emotional and we're like, and it's in our account and we're not automatically disciplined enough to have the stuff just taken care of for us, it tends to not happen, right?
Yeah, and that's like, if you back up and look at what we're talking about, basically we're saying, how do I take the pressure and responsibility and need for discipline and self-will off of me as a parent and off of, our relationship, and place it instead on a system. And so it's just an agreement now that, okay, this is how much you get each week. This is what percentage you pay of your stuff. This is how much goes to savings. And then Greenlight automates the process. So I feel so light as a parent. It's like so easy. Yeah. I don't have to do anything. I literally now I don't even have to touch it once a week. It just automatically happens, and it's all instilled. And so now, and when the kids, when they're going through some painful financial point, it's not, Dad, this is your job. Come fix it for me. It's, Dad, this is going on. And I'm like, oh, that sucks. Does that hurt? That looks like it hurts. I'm sorry. What can we do about that? It's like, that's the position I like being in.
Yeah, for sure. And you talked about big purchases, and then we'll wrap up here. Cars, college. Talk to us about college. Now, not everybody's into college these days, and who knows if it's, it's right for some kids and not for others. Is your and your wife's plan to have your kids pay 100% of their own college, or is it like a 50-50 thing? Or because you've seen the money grow over time and that they're earning, and how should a parent think about college and percentages here?
Yeah, it's a great point. And my oldest is in college. My second, I'm not even having him graduate from high school. He's in a trade tech program right now, and doing some at the high school, but he's definitely not going to college. My third probably will. Like, I don't really care. It depends on what they're passionate about and good at. But my daughter, who's 18, this is her freshman year. I think once your kids are 18, 19, 20, you really kind of have to feel into it and ask, where are they at? What are they ready for? What can they do? It's not like it used to be where once your kids are 18, now they're automatically out of the house. And in my opinion, that's a good thing. It gives them longer to cook in the oven so that you get a better result by the time they do lunch. I don't think it's a problem when kids are at home till they're 19 or even 20.
Sure, totally.
So with her, the agreement we have is she pays 50%. And she's got some scholarships and she's doing some stuff, but she pays for 50% of her tuition and we pay for the other half. And she's actually responsible to pay for her own books. But so far, when she's been asking me help, I've been helping her find cheaper ways of getting the books on eBay and stuff rather than going to the college bookstore.
Yeah.
And then usually when I'm helping her, I just pay for them and she just flips. She loves it. She's so thankful that I'm paying for her college books. She's just like so happy because she thought she had to do that because it's on her technically, but she's got a job and she's doing the best she can. And so I'm just glad that she's paying for half of her tuition.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'm assuming your kids work at a certain age. They actually go get jobs also, summer jobs or whatever.
Yeah, it really depends on the kid and what else they're doing in their life developmentally. But there's an encouragement to do that when they have a little bit of space. So she's got a job nannying this year and she's doing that. The child below her is so busy with wrestling and his HVAC program at the school he's going to, plus his high school classes, that he doesn't, I wouldn't want him to get a job right now. So it just really depends on the situation.
Full, right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. And James, this has been amazing. I'm really grateful for your wisdom here and all the hard-earned hours you put into this to figure it all out.
Oh, it's like the one area of my life where I'm kid motivated, like I'm dad motivated. I'm like an okay entrepreneur. I'm like an okay, whatever. But I feel like when it comes to being a dad, it's just like, I love doing it. It's so fun to me. And I love like really figuring out ways to help my kids in ways that feel good for me too. So it's something I love doing. I'm so happy that I got to share it, Jayson.
Cool. Yeah. I love being a dad too. I think we share that, as we talked about before, so much. James, what's a good next step if people want to follow up with you or kind of what you're building? Is there a website people can go to find out more?
Yeah, good question. So the company that my business partner and I are building involves it. A lot of these resources we'll be sharing there too for family life. Right now, that link is just on his personal website, and it's drericjroman.com/onelife. One Life is the name of the company. It's the number 1 and then life. So drericjroman.com/onelife.
Cool. And Eric's a great dude. I've hung out with him many times and his kids. Sweet. We'll put that in the show notes also. And I wish you well in your new venture with Eric and your families. Sounds awesome. Sounds like a great, amazing new direction.
Yeah, thanks, Jayson. It feels good to reconnect with you too. I really admire, I've listened to several of your podcasts and I really just admire the way you think as a dad and just as a human and the way that you build relationships. Several things that you've talked about in podcasts about the way that you're focusing on helping your children build healthy relationships has been inspiring to me. So I really love the work that you're doing too at the Relationship School and love your podcast.
Oh, thanks, man. Oh, I forgot to ask you one question that I ask everybody, which is, we want to reach kids, young people with the tools that we have here. And if you were standing in front of 1,000 high school students and you could only really offer one thing about love or relationships, what would you say to those kids?
Well, I've been in that exact situation. And usually my theme for those kids revolves around embracing your own humanity, just identifying all the parts of yourself that you've labeled or branded and that others might label or brand. And instead of categorizing those parts, just learning to love all the parts of yourself. And I find that when kids can do that, when they can find that kind of self-love and acceptance, they tend to naturally bring that out in their relationships with others and in the world generally. So that's my favorite theme to hit on with those kiddos.
Very cool. Thank you. All right, James. Great to see you. And thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks, Jayson.
Hey, if you want to up-level your life, your relationship life specifically, I want you to consider our Relationship Mastery program. It's 9 months of complete transformation where you become a better listener, a better communicator. You learn how to have secure relationships and you get an experiential taste of that. You feel seen and supported and challenged to reach your relationship goals. And really, you become a better communicator. So many people have gone through this course now. And we have a done with you version of it now, which is amazing, where you get assigned a private relationship coach. You get to do live group coaching with me once a month and ask me anything you want. There's office hours where you get to meet with one of our coaches to nerd out on the curriculum. And the community is very strong. And these are people who care a lot about relationships and they want to get what they want to get, which is they want to be in a relationship and not betray themselves, right? They want to get the relationship they want while being true to themselves. That's what most of us want. And this course is the path for you to get that. Here's what one of our participants in the past has said about this course.
What I would say to people that have been listening to the podcast but aren't ready to take that final step into joining the course, the most powerful thing has been like the partner calls. The accountability is something that you're not going to get by just listening to podcasts on your own. Because I thought the same thing, like, oh, I'm getting a lot out of just listening to these podcasts, and I'm, been in therapy, I've, done this and that. To take that deeper dive and the commitment, there's something about just the financial commitment, the time and the energy that you put into it. What you put in is what you're going to get out of it. And so again, if, invest in yourself.
All right. Amazing words from one of our heartfelt students here at the Relationship School. If you want to change your life like they did, go to relationshipschool.com/relationship mastery, and we'll see you in there.